My presentation is on comparative political science knowledge and the quality of political institutions in Africa of the Department of Politics, University of Johannesburg in South Africa, as well as Obafemi Awolowo University, Nigeria. The introduction goes that African universities have a high number of departments that offer political science as a course or program. And as a body of knowledge, the discipline, which took off with the establishment of universities during the colonial administration, has transited from its colonial heritage to reflect changes that have been wrought in politics and society, especially in the fights for independence and later for democracy. Of course, most of us will recollect that a number of African countries underwent military rule. So how far these changes that have been wrought in politics and society has been a subject of debate. But changes in the discipline has not been uniform, it has not been unidirectional, and has not been holistic. And lastly, to what extent are political science databases, data sets used? These forms are what the study set out to unravel. And so we started looking at this by having a look at political science as a body of knowledge, the assumptions and the realities. We should know that the study of political science as a course of study started in South Africa. It's over a century now, much earlier than the rest of Africa. And that the influence of the struggle for independence and the fate of new states were part of the curriculum and pedagogy. Political science departments were established as separate disciplines. Some places it started as political economy, some places started as political studies, in some places it's just called political administration. Started as a separate discipline, and the courses that were taught was to equip the students with certain skills to influence various aspects of public policy. Therefore, political science as a body of knowledge was accorded as immediately after post-independence, a place of honor and influence. However, this proposition of honor did not materialize over time for two reasons. One is that the first has to do with the misconception that political science as a course leads to a career in politics, or in local parlance, it involves a training to become a politician. There's this misconception from the interviews we conducted. This in Africa has led to the mischaracterization of what the discipline as a body of knowledge should and can do. The second misconception that has to do with the training of the teachers of the course. With most of the teachers trained to see the discipline in descriptive terms, there's little recourse to quantification, replication, and validity of findings. Again, don't forget that most of our teachers, of course, had their education in the West, and that is replicated in most of the students they also taught. And so it was largely descriptive that was passed from the old generation to the new generation. With most of the teachers trained to see the discipline in descriptive terms, there's little recourse, like I said, to quantification, replication, and validity of findings. And therefore, we have different ownership structure of what political science should look like. It is debatable that the descriptive nature of the discipline has changed till now, except in South Africa. In South Africa is where we have seen there have been a lot of movement towards quantification. So the political science as assumptions still continue, that it is noteworthy that the teaching of the discipline in Africa has been normative, reflecting the colonial orientation, exposure, and the post-independent struggle for democracy. In other words, the methodological approach was and is still utopian, traditional, and historical. It was less concerned with science and quantification, especially with using the quantification methodology to explain and predict political happenings. Even when behavioral approach was introduced into the discipline, it has not permitted the discipline as expected. Resistance to quantification and the use of data was fierce and is still fierce due to continued training received from those who were originally trained in the normative, traditional, and descriptive nature of political science. This, it must be noted, is divorced from the larger body of political science knowledge in the world, whose emphasis is on quantification of political phenomena to explain political realities. If you look at the works of Schindler and Modu in 2008, you look at the works of Bradley, Collier, and the rest, you see, even the works of John Gehrig, you would see emphasis on political methodology as a sub-discipline now in political science. But this is not reflected in Africa. The seeming resistance to quantification and contradiction in political science teaching and research in African universities is based on two streams of thought of what the discipline should be like in the continent. The first stream is based on the argument that discipline should focus on description and direct application of political science knowledge. The second stream is based on the argument that scientific method is more appropriate in view of modern world and therefore deserving more emphasis than the normative descriptive approach. If you look at the arguments of Ali, you look at the arguments of Ake, you find evidence of this, of the insistence on the descriptive method. So the research design, what design did we use? The study used a two-phase survey. The first is an in-depth interview of colleagues, particularly in the heads of the Department of Political Science, political studies, because in Zambia it's political studies. In some places also in South Africa, most of the Southern Africa is political studies. So in our slide we put this political science / political studies program. And we also interviewed two other lecturers in South Africa, University of Johannesburg, Obafemi Awolowo University in Nigeria, and University of Zambia, Lusaka. The second is the quantitative examination of the publication outputs of lecturers in the three departments to determine the extent of the use or non-use of the data sets in their research works, and in particular the databases of Afrobarometer, Varieties of Democracy, and Mo Ibrahim. We sent letters initially to the three organizations to give us access to their database so that we can see the frequency, the number of African scholars that have used their database to publish. But this was not forthcoming as at the time this work was prepared. So that's why we used the research outputs of lecturers in the three universities who are our colleagues. The responses to both the quantitative and qualitative survey satisfy the standards of quantitative and qualitative survey research, and thus provide the basis for a credible assessment of the discipline in selected African countries. Very quickly, surveying the field, research and discussion. When we look at the results, we discover that over 85% over 58.5 are non-users of this database. Less than 41.5% uses this database, whether Afrobarometer or Mo Ibrahim or what have you. In fact, at a point, Mo Ibrahim put it out that those who use their database will be paid, just to encourage people to patronize the database. We also look at the level of usage. It was discovered that it was very low at Zambia and in OAU, but very high or much higher in Johannesburg. We also look at the awareness. We discovered that virtually all lecturers are aware of these databases, of all these data sets, only that the usage is much more lower than expected. And then we also look at a composite analysis of the country or the countries of the level of awareness and usage. Also, again, South Africa comes tops. Again, this speaks basically to the level of knowledge or the level of exposure of the South African political scientists compared to their, other African counterparts. And we'll do more analysis as we go on. Very quickly, we now look at what are this quantification and the challenges of political science. What are the issues? The first is the challenge of training. Many political scientists who were interviewed said we are not trained in quantification. They are not trained in quantification, and therefore they are not particularly proficient in mathematics and statistics. This is the number one drawback. Of course, the training is the number two. The second challenge has to do with the dwindling academic staff meant to cope with the burgeoning number of students in political science department. In post-apartheid South Africa, the number increased. After independence, the number increased. The number of students that were admitted at both undergraduate and postgraduate levels increased. And of course, the staff level did not increase at commensurate level. And so there was little time for training, retraining, and further skill acquisition. The third has to do with challenge of funding. Incidentally, Professor Victor mentioned about Codestra. Some of us have benefited from Codestra to research methodology, scholarly writing, and so many other avenues. And so you discover that most of our colleagues don't have the funding. The university doesn't provide funding for staff development. In fact, as we speak, in University of Zambia, salaries are being held. And so you have all kinds of issues with funding. And so we'll also look very quickly at political science and the quality of political institutions. And our take is that without the use of these data sets, without the use of political methodology in terms of quantification, it has robbed our political institutions of the facts and figure for them to function effectively. In fact, what we have across these three countries, in most cases, are political institutions that are dysfunctional. And so, we believe, in conclusion, that we need to look at three key issues quickly before I round up. Are we going to look at it in terms of Renaissance? Are we going to look at it in terms of revolution? Or are we going to look at it in terms of reversion? If you are, the choice is us if we want to look at the future of political science. Are we just going to, we want to have a new revolution? The trend now in the body of political science, especially in Europe and in North America, is towards quantification. Is Africa going to remain where it is in terms of largely utopian descriptive methodology, or are we going to also adapt to the current realities? Of course, we must also say before I round up that critical engagement with quantification within discipline is necessary, while not neglecting the philosophical basis of most of these concepts. Taking a little further, the presence of philosophical inquiry in political science methodology is not an abnormality signifying subjectivity, but rather a well-nuanced approach that combines the empirical research that produces outputs that can produce outputs with mathematical results that are testable, explanatory, and replicable. Such research production is what Africa political science needs. Thank you.